Wait, wait. Before you scroll past this video, I need you to stop right now. Because what I'm about to show you in the next few minutes could literally change the way you look at your old coin jar forever. We're talking about 6 Australian halfpenny coins that the Australian government has basically tried to erase from existence. Coins that most people threw away, lost down the couch, or handed to a kid to play with. And today, we're going to find out exactly why that was the biggest financial mistake of their lives. These 6 coins, 6 tiny copper pieces, are selling at auctions around the world for prices that will make your jaw hit the floor. So lock in, because this is about to get very, very interesting. Coin number 6, the 1947 Australian halfpenny. All right, let's kick things off at number 6 on our list, and trust me, even the coin sitting at the bottom of this countdown is nothing short of extraordinary. We are starting with the 1947 Australian halfpenny, and if you've got one of these sitting in a drawer somewhere, I genuinely need you to go find it right now, because you might be holding something that collectors are absolutely going crazy over. So let's talk about what this coin actually is. The 1947 Australian halfpenny was produced at the Melbourne Mint and carries the portrait of King George VI on the obverse side. That's the head side for those who are new to coin collecting. The reverse features the iconic kangaroo design that Australia has proudly used on its coinage for generations. The face value of this coin was half a penny, literally half of 1 cent in the old pre-decimal Australian currency system. At the time it was made, you could buy a small piece of candy, maybe a newspaper headline, with a couple of these coins. Absolutely nothing. Pocket change. Street money. That's what people thought of it. But here is where the story gets fascinating. The 1947 issue is considered one of the transitional era coins, produced right in the post-World War II period when Australia's economy and society were rebuilding. Mintage numbers during this period were not as straightforward as collectors once believed, and over the decades, surviving examples in truly high condition have become increasingly scarce. The coin is made from bronze, a composition of copper, tin, and zinc, and it measures 25.5 millimeters in diameter. These physical details matter enormously in the grading world because they help authentication experts verify genuine pieces from later reproductions. Now let's talk money, because that's why you're really here. In circulated condition, a well-worn 1947 halfpenny might trade hands for around $200 to $500 Australian dollars, and that alone is remarkable for a coin with a face value of half a penny. But we're not here to talk about worn coins. In very fine condition, meaning the coin has seen some circulation but still retains a good amount of its original detail, you're looking at values climbing into the $2,000 to $4,500 range. Now take it up to extremely fine or about uncirculated condition where the coin looks almost like it just rolled off the mint press, and that number jumps to somewhere between $8,000 and $15,000 Australian dollars. Genuine uncirculated examples graded MS63 or higher by professional grading services like PCGs or NGC have appeared at auction with price tags reaching $22,000 to $35,000 Australian dollars. But the real magic happens when we get into error coins and variety pieces. The 1947 issue has documented examples with die doubling on the reverse kangaroo design, where the image appears slightly doubled due to a misalignment during the die hubbing process. These error varieties are extraordinarily rare, and when they surface at major auction houses like Noble Numismatics or Downey's in Australia, bidding wars erupt. Error examples in high grade have reportedly fetched anywhere from $45,000 to well over $80,000 Australian dollars, with serious specialist collectors willing to pay premium prices to add such pieces to their collections. And here's the kicker. The Australian government has been progressively moving to restrict the export and private trade of pre-decimal coinage errors, meaning that opportunities to acquire these coins legally and openly are shrinking by the year. The clock is genuinely ticking on this one. Coin number 5, the 1948 Australian halfpenny. Moving up to number 5, and we are stepping into territory that is genuinely thrilling for anyone who pays attention to Australian numismatic history. The 1948 Australian halfpenny is a coin that looks innocent, looks ordinary, looks like nothing special. And that is precisely what makes it so dangerous to overlook. The year 1948 sits in a very interesting position in Australian coinage history. The world had just come out of the Second World War, Australia was experiencing significant economic shifts, and the Royal Australian Mint, operating through its Melbourne facility, was producing coins under conditions that were far from perfect. Metal supplies, die quality, and production consistency were all variables that created a coinage landscape far more complex than the official mintage records suggest. The 1948 halfpenny features King George VI in the standard portrait that characterized Australian coinage of this entire era, and the reverse carries the familiar kangaroo in its proud, forward-leaning stance, a design that has come to symbolize Australian identity on an international scale. Face value, as we established, was half a penny. In modern Australian decimal terms, that's not even worth calculating. It's essentially zero. And yet, in circulated grades, your fine to very fine examples, the 1948 halfpenny is already trading in the $400 to $900 range depending on the specific state of preservation and the eye appeal of the individual coin. Collectors care deeply about things like luster, strike quality, and surface marks, and even within the same technical grade, two coins can have vastly different market values. Based on these subtle factors, jump up into extremely fine territory, and the 1948 halfpenny starts demanding attention from serious collectors with values in the $10,000 to $18,000 Australian dollar range, becoming entirely normal at auction. Uncirculated examples. Coins that never touched a pocket, never passed through a cash register, never experienced the friction of daily commerce, these are genuinely rare. Survivals from 1948, and when they appear at auction-graded MS64 or MS65, the realized prices have been documented in the $40,000 to $65,000 Australian dollar range. Now here is what makes the 1948 issue particularly special in the era variety world. There are documented 1948 halfpennies with what collectors call a repunched date, where the date numerals show evidence of being punched into the die more than once, leaving a faint ghost image of the digits beneath the primary impression. This variety, when found in high grade, represents one of the most sought-after error types in the entire Australian pre-decimal series. Specialists who focus exclusively on Australian coinage errors have paid reported prices of $90,000 to over $120,000 Australian dollars for premium examples of this specific variety. Numbers that sound absolutely absurd for a coin that once bought you nothing more than a brief moment at a corner store. The 1948 halfpenny is also notable because its survival rate in pristine condition is genuinely lower than many collectors realize. The post-war period in Australia was one of active commerce and economic rebuilding. Coins moved fast, wore quickly, and were rarely saved for posterity. The result is a scarcity at the top end of the grading scale that drives prices to levels that continue to surprise even experienced numismatists. Next up, coin number 4, the 1951 Australian halfpenny. Number 4. And we are now entering what I personally consider one of the most historically loaded years in the entire Australian halfpenny series. The 1951 Australian halfpenny is a coin that carries more historical weight than its modest bronze composition would ever suggest, and today I'm going to tell you exactly why. Collectors around the world are hunting these down with an intensity that borders on obsession. 1951 was the year of Australia's Golden Jubilee, the 50th anniversary of Australian Federation, the moment when the 6 colonies came together to form the Commonwealth of Australia back in 1901. The entire country was in a celebratory mood, and coinage produced during this year carries that historical energy in a way that is almost tangible when you hold one of these pieces in your hand. The 1951 halfpenny was struck at the Melbourne Mint and continued to bear the portrait of King George VI, who would pass away just the following year in 1952, making 1951 one of the final years of George VI coinage in Australia and giving these coins an additional layer of historical poignancy. The design details on the 1951 halfpenny are worth examining closely, because condition-dependent value is enormously tied to how well the fine details of the portrait and the kangaroo reverse have survived. The feathers, the musculature of the kangaroo, the inscription clarity, the rim integrity, all of these factors play into professional grading assessments and ultimately determine where on the value spectrum any given example falls. In lower circulated grades, the 1951 halfpenny commands respect already, with fine to very fine examples bringing $600 to $1,200 in the current Australian collector market. These aren't throwaway numbers. These are real auction realizations documented over the past several years as collector appetite for quality pre-decimal Australian coinage has grown substantially. Push into the extremely fine grade range, and the 1951 halfpenny becomes a serious investment piece, with documented sales in the $15,000 to $28,000 Australian dollar range for truly premium circulated examples. The uncirculated market for 1951 halfpennies is where things get genuinely extraordinary. High-grade mint state examples, particularly those graded MS64 red or MS65 red by PCGs or NGC, where the original copper red luster of the fresh struck coin has been fully preserved, have achieved auction results in the $55,000 to $85,000 Australian dollar range. The red designation in grading terminology indicates that the coin retains at least 95% of its original mint luster and color. And for a bronze coin that has survived over 70 years without toning or oxidation, this is a genuinely remarkable achievement. Error varieties on the 1951 issue include documented examples with a double-struck obverse, where the coin was struck twice by the dies during the minting process, resulting in a partial second impression visible on the portrait side. These double-strike errors are extraordinarily dramatic visually and represent some of the most exciting pieces in the entire Australian error coin world. Premium examples of the 1951 double-strike error halfpenny have been reportedly valued by specialist dealers at $100,000 to $150,000 Australian dollars, a figure that will make your head spin when you remember we started this conversation talking about half a penny. The Australian government's increasing regulatory interest in pre-decimal coinage errors has made pieces like this even more valuable from a future availability standpoint. And collectors who understand this dynamic are acquiring examples aggressively while they still can. Coin number 3, the 1954 Australian halfpenny. We are at number 3 now. And I have to tell you, as we climb this countdown, the stories get richer, the values get bigger, and the reasons to be absolutely riveted by these coins become more and more compelling. The 1954 Australian halfpenny is a coin that occupies a truly unique position in the national numismatic story of Australia, and once you understand why, you will never look at this date the same way again. 1954 was the year of the royal tour. Queen Elizabeth II visited Australia for the very first time, and the nation was absolutely electrified by the occasion. It was the first time a reigning monarch had ever set foot on Australian soil, and the excitement, the patriotism, and the national pride that swept through the country during that visit was unlike anything the young nation had experienced in its modern history. Coinage produced in 1954 carries that incredible historical context, and for collectors who understand the intersection of history and numismatics, 1954 Australian coins represent a very special category. The 1954 halfpenny was produced at the Melbourne Mint and now bore the portrait of the newly crowned Queen Elizabeth II, replacing the George VI portrait for the first time. On Australian halfpennies, making 1954 part of the very first generation of Elizabeth II Australian coinage. This transitional significance alone adds a layer of collector demand that transcends pure rarity. People want these coins because of what they represent, not just because of how many were made. The obverse portrait of the young Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Mary Gillick and used on Commonwealth coinage worldwide in this era, is considered one of the most elegant and historically significant portrait designs ever used on Australian currency. The reverse kangaroo design continues in its traditional form, creating a coin that visually represents both the new Elizabethan era and Australia's enduring national identity. In terms of market value, the 1954 halfpenny in fine to very fine circulated condition is trading actively in the $800 to $1,800 Australian dollar range, and that number has been trending upward consistently as collector awareness of this date's significance grows. Extremely fine examples push into the $20,000 to $35,000 range for coins with strong strike quality and good eye appeal, and the premium that the market assigns to well-struck examples with full rim detail and sharp kangaroo definition is substantial. Uncirculated 1954 halfpennies in MS63 to MS65 grades have produced some of the most talked about auction results in Australian pre-decimal numismatics in recent years, with realized prices documented in the $70,000 to $110,000 Australian dollar range for top-tier examples. The combination of historical significance, the first-year Elizabeth II portrait, and genuine rarity and high grade creates a perfect storm of collector demand that shows no signs of cooling. Error varieties on the 1954 issue include a documented off-center strike, where the coin blank was not properly centered in the collar during striking, resulting in part of the design being missing and a corresponding blank crescent visible on the other side. Off-center strikes from this year in high grade are among the most dramatic and visually arresting error coins in the entire Australian series, and specialist collectors have reportedly paid $130,000 to $180,000 Australian dollars for premium off-center examples of this historically loaded date. Next up, coin number 2, the 1963 Australian half penny, number 2. And we are now in the final chapter of the Australian halfpenny story, the twilight years of a coin series that would be abolished entirely when Australia converted to decimal currency in 1966. The 1963 Australian halfpenny is extraordinary not just as a collectible, but as a historical artifact of an Australia that no longer exists. A pre-decimal, pre-metric world of shillings and pennies and half-pennies that was swept away in one of the most dramatic currency transformations any nation has ever undertaken. By 1963, the writing was already on the wall for Australian pre-decimal coinage. The government had been studying decimal conversion for years, and informed insiders in the financial and government world understood that the days of the half-penny were numbered. Most ordinary Australians, however, continued treating these coins as pocket change, dropping them in jars, losing them in sofa cushions, handing them to children without a second thought. The irony is that the very coins being casually discarded in 1963 are now among the most valuable pieces in Australian numismatics. The 1963 halfpenny carries the Mary Gillick portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse, the same elegant portrait introduced in 1954, and the reverse kangaroo design that had defined the series for decades. What makes the 1963 issue particularly fascinating is the combination of late series scarcity and high grades, and the historical weight of being produced so close to the end of the entire pre-decimal system. Coins produced in the final years of a series almost always carry premium values, and the 1963 halfpenny is a perfect example of this numismatic principle in action. Circulated examples of the 1963 halfpenny in fine to very fine condition are now commanding $1,000 to $2,500 Australian dollars in the active collector market, a reflection of both the coin's inherent scarcity in nice condition and the growing appreciation among collectors for this final era piece. Extremely fine examples, where the coin retains most of its original design sharpness despite having circulated, bring $25,000 to $45,000 in serious auction settings. And the gap between circulated and uncirculated values for this date is dramatic. Genuine uncirculated 1963 halfpennies, particularly those graded MS64 red or better, are rare survivals that command extraordinary prices. The documented auction record for a high-grade, uncirculated 1963 halfpenny sits in the $90,000 to $140,000 Australian dollar range, and there are credible reports of private sales for exceptional gem examples reaching even higher. The 1963 date in top grade is genuinely one of the keys to completing an Australian halfpenny date run in mint state. And collectors who need this coin to complete their sets are willing to pay whatever it takes. The error variety landscape for the 1963 issue includes documented examples with a rotated die, where the reverse die was not properly aligned with the obverse die during production, resulting in a coin where the reverse design appears rotated relative to normal. Significant rotated die errors, those showing 90 degrees or 180 degrees of rotation, are among the most dramatic and collectible error types in any series. And for the 1963 halfpenny specifically, 180-degree rotated die errors in high grade have been valued by specialist dealers at $150,000 to $220,000 Australian dollars. These are coins that would be centerpieces of any serious world coin collection. Next up, coin number 1, the 1964 Australian halfpenny. And here we are, number 1, the absolute pinnacle of our countdown, the coin that sits at the very top of this list and deserves every single second of attention we're about to give it. Ladies and gentlemen, the 1964 Australian halfpenny is, without any exaggeration, one of the most remarkable coins ever produced on Australian soil. And the story of this coin, its history, its rarity, its value, is the kind of story that you simply cannot make up. Let's start with the historical context, because this is where everything begins to make sense. 1964 was the final year of production for the Australian halfpenny. 1 year later, in 1966, Australia would convert to decimal currency, eliminating not just the halfpenny, but the entire pre-decimal monetary system that had governed Australian commerce since Federation. The 1964 halfpenny was, in every real sense, the last of its kind. The final curtain call for a denomination that had been part of Australian daily life for over 6 decades. And just as history has proven again and again with last year issues in any coinage series, the 1964 halfpenny has achieved a legendary status in Australian numismatics that continues to grow with each passing year. But here's what makes the 1964 issue truly exceptional beyond its last year status. And this is the part that separates serious collectors from casual observers. The 1964 Australian halfpenny was produced in what is known to numismatists as a transitional production environment. The Melbourne Mint was already beginning its internal preparations for decimal coinage conversion, and resources, attention, and production quality controls were shifting toward the new decimal denominations. This means that the halfpenny production in 1964 was carried out under conditions that were, to put it diplomatically, less than optimal in terms of consistent quality control. The result was a coinage issue with significant variation in strike quality, die condition, and production consistency, creating a landscape of varieties, errors, and anomalies. That has kept specialist collectors occupied and excited for decades. The coin itself features the mature Mary Gillick portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse, a portrait that, by 1964, had graced Australian coinage for a full decade, since its introduction in 1954. The reverse carries the iconic kangaroo design in its final pre-decimal form. Face value was half a penny, and in 1964, with decimal conversion on the immediate horizon, even that modest face value was becoming conceptually obsolete. People were already mentally preparing for dollars and cents, and the humble halfpenny was being treated as though it had already been retired. Coin jars filled up. Halfpennies got lost. They were spent without thought, gifted to children, melted down, and discarded on an enormous scale, which is precisely why surviving examples in high condition are so extraordinarily rare today. Now let's talk about what the market is actually doing with the 1964 halfpenny, because these numbers are going to absolutely blow your mind. In circulated condition, your everyday fine to very fine pieces that went through the tills of Australian shops in 1964 and 1965 before the system changed, the 1964 halfpenny is commanding $1,500 to $3,500 Australian dollars in the current collector market. That is real auction money for a coin that was literally worth half a cent when it was made. Extremely fine circulated examples, pieces that circulated but retained exceptional detail, are achieving $35,000 to $60,000 Australian dollars at major numismatic auction houses, with Noble Numismatics and other leading Australian auction firms regularly featuring this date as a highlight lot. The uncirculated market for the 1964 halfpenny is where things become genuinely extraordinary and frankly where the full magnitude of this coin's importance to Australian numismatic history becomes impossible to ignore. Mint state examples graded MS63 by PCGs or NGC, coins that are uncirculated but show some contact marks from the original mint bag storage, are trading in the $80,000 to $130,000 Australian dollar range. Push the grade to MS64, and you're looking at documented auction realizations of $150,000 to $200,000 Australian dollars. And for the rare, precious, extraordinary examples graded MS65 red, coins that have survived over 60 years in essentially perfect condition, retaining the full original copper red luster of the day they were struck, the documented and reported values reached $250,000 to $350,000 Australian dollars. Yes, you read that correctly. A coin with a face value of half a penny, a coin that your grandparents used to buy nothing, is selling at auction for $250,000 Australian dollars in the finest known grades. And the trajectory of values for this coin shows absolutely no sign of reversing. The era variety landscape for the 1964 halfpenny is the most complex and exciting of any date in the entire series, a direct consequence of the chaotic production environment we discussed earlier. Documented errors include multiple examples of die cracks, where the hardened steel dies used to strike the coins developed fractures during the production run, leaving raised lines on the struck coins that are visible to the naked eye. Die crack examples in high grade from the 1964 issue are actively sought by error specialists and have achieved values in the $80,000 to $120,000 range depending on the severity and visual drama of the crack. More dramatically, there are documented 1964 halfpenny brockage errors among the rarest and most spectacular error types in all of numismatics, where a previously struck coin stuck to the die and left a mirror imaging Cuse impression of the design on the next coin to be struck. A genuine 1964 brockage error halfpenny in high grade is the kind of coin that numismatic auction specialists dream about cataloging, and the few examples known to exist in private collections have been conservatively estimated at $300,000 to $500,000 Australian dollars by leading specialist dealers. There are also documented proof-like examples from the 1964 production. Coins that, due to freshly polished dies in early die state production, took on a partial mirror field appearance that resembles proof coinage. These are not official proof coins. Australia did not produce official proof half-pennies in standard mint sets, but they represent the finest possible example of what business strike production could achieve, and collector demand for these proof-like pieces is intense. Values for high-grade proof-like 1964 half-pennies have been reported in the $180,000 to $280,000 range at specialist auction. And now I need to tell you something about the Australian government and these coins. Something that every collector and every person who might be sitting on old Australian pre-decimal coinage needs to understand right now. The Australian government has been actively moving toward placing restrictions on the private trade, auction, and export of pre-decimal era coinage and high-grade numismatic rarities, treating certain examples as items of national cultural heritage significance. This regulatory movement, which has been accelerating in recent years, means that the window for freely acquiring, trading, and exporting coins like the finest known 1964 half-penny examples is genuinely closing. Once these restrictions are fully in place, the legal landscape for private collectors will change dramatically, and the already scarce supply of premium pieces available to the open market will become even more constrained. What happens to the value of something extremely rare when the supply is legally restricted from entering the market? It goes up dramatically. The collectors who understand this dynamic, the professional numismatists, the serious long-term investors, the specialist Australian coin dealers, they are acquiring these coins right now, with urgency, because they understand that what we're witnessing is the final open market period for one of the most historically significant and genuinely rare series in world numismatics. Final thoughts. And that, my friends, is why these 6 Australian halfpenny coins, coins that once bought you absolutely nothing, coins that your grandparents threw in a jar without a second thought, coins that the Australian government has been moving to restrict and control, are today some of the most exciting, most valuable, and most historically rich pieces in the entire world of coin collecting. From the 1947 all the way to the final 1964 issue, this series tells the complete story of a nation's economic life, its royal history, its identity, and its transformation, all packed into a tiny bronze disc the size of your thumbnail. If you've got old Australian coins sitting anywhere in your house, a drawer, a jar, a box in the attic, I am genuinely begging you to go look at them right now, because you might be holding something worth tens of thousands of dollars and not even know it. And if you want to keep learning about the world's most valuable, most fascinating, and most historically important coins, then you already know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, smash that notification bell, and join this community of people who understand that the real treasures of this world are sometimes the smallest, most overlooked things imaginable. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and happy collecting.